we are back for example 5. Before we start example 5, there's a few things that we need to go over first. Okay, so just a helpful hint. If two quantities are opposite, their sum is 0. So what we have here is 5 minus x, the quantity 5 minus x, plus the quantity x minus 5. Now, what's different between these two? If you see here, there's a 5, there's an x. What's the difference? Well, 5 here is positive, and 5 here is negative. And x here is negative, and this x is positive. So because of that, that makes these two terms opposites. They're called opposites. So they have the same number and the same variables, but for both of them, they're opposite signs. So positive, negative, negative, positive. All right? And we can take away these parentheses because there is no number besides 1 outside of them. You remember that from chapter 6? So we drop them, right? And what happens when we add two things that are opposites? Well, the 5 and the negative 5, they cancel each other out and become 0. And the negative x and x, they also cancel themselves out and become 0. So when two quantities are added together, their sum is 0. Okay? So in this next example, we're going to be exploring opposites. Okay? So notice they look very similar. It's the same number, the same letter. The only thing is different with both of them is the signs are different for the numbers and the signs are different for the letters. And if that's the case, then what you have is opposites. Okay, so recognizing opposite binomials can help you factor polynomials. The binomials 5 minus x and x minus 5 are opposites, right? Because we have the same number, the same letter, except this one's positive, this one's negative, and this one's negative, and this is positive, right? So they're opposites. So it says, notice that 5 minus x can be written as negative 1x minus 5. Okay. Let's go ahead and look at that. Okay, so it's saying this can be written, these two things can be written the same. So it's saying that, okay, there's the opposites, right? So 5 minus x and x minus 5. These are opposites, and it's basically saying if you take one of the opposites and multiply it by negative 1, it's the same thing. Okay, let's see that. Let's see if when we take this right here, and we multiply it by negative 1, do we get this? Okay, that's the question. So we're going to use the distributive property, right? So negative 1 times x is going to be, negative x. And negative 1 times a negative 5, so the negative times a negative is a positive. And then just 5, right? Okay, and then if I can switch these two, right, with the commutative property of addition. So I can go 5 minus x, and there we have it. We do have the same thing, right? This is the same. So that is correct. These two things are equivalent. So basically, here, 5 minus x, what we came up with, is the same thing as negative 1x minus 5. Now, this is really super important because what you have here, right, here and here, those are opposites. So what this is basically saying, if you take an opposite and you either factor out a negative 1 or you multiply it by a negative 1, you get the other opposite, okay? And this is going to be very, very important because when we factor by grouping, you're going to have something like this. There's going to be 4 terms, right? And then let's say you factor out and you end up with something like this. Okay, so what you would have, right, is when we get to this point, you'd want to factor by grouping. So you'd want to factor out this and you'd want to factor out this, correct? But if you see, they're not exactly the same. This is 5, this is 5, this is x, right? There's the same 5, there's the same x, but this 5 is positive, this one's negative, this x is negative, and this one's positive. So you can't just factor it out like we did before. However, what you need to recognize is that these right here, they are opposites. And you can make them into the same thing by factoring out a -1. So if we take this one here and we factor out a -1, okay, so I'm just going to rewrite all of this. And instead of this being positive, I'm going to factor out a negative. What happens, this stays the same, but what happens when I factor out a negative from this? This was positive, but now it turns into being negative. And this was negative, but now when I factor out a negative, it becomes positive. All right? And you see if I distribute that negative back, a negative times a negative is a positive, and a negative times a positive is a negative. So I'm going to get this back again. So that's kind of the trick. And then if I just rewrite this, right, I have my +5 minus x. I now have the same thing. I have my 5 minus x and my 5 minus x here. And so then I can factor it out. Now we have the same. Even though we started with opposites, this is like a trick. It's the -1 trick. Okay, so you have to remember that. When they're opposites, you factor out that negative, then it changes the sign of this one, and then you factor out that 5 minus x, and what you're left with is 4 minus 2x. And that would be the answer for that one. Okay, do you guys see that? So this is just a little trick that we're going to use in the next couple problems. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with example 5. Okay, so we're going to factor this by grouping. So 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So first two terms, those are a group. And then so everything is the same, like in example 4. Okay, those are a group. We're just going to factor out that GCF. So we have numbers, we have letters. We're going to factor out the greatest common factor with the numbers first, which for 2 and 12 would be 2. And then we have x cubed and x squared. So the greatest common factor there would be x squared. Now 2 times what is 2? 2 times 1, right? But I'm not going to write that yet. I'm going to look at the variables. X squared times what is x cubed, and I need another x. So I don't really need that one right now. And then we're going to go 2 times what is -12. Well, I'm going to need a negative. 2 times 6. And then x squared times what is x squared? It would be 1, but we don't need to write that. So there we have that one. And now we're going to go here. So we're going to look at the numbers and then the letters, but this doesn't have a letter, so it's just going to be the numbers. So what's the greatest common factor with the numbers? 18 and 3, I'm going to say it's 3. So we're going to go plus 3. 3 times what is 18? It's 6. 3 times what is -3? So we're going to need a negative. And then 3 times, it would be 1 is 3, right? But there we'll just put the x there. Okay. So there we have it. So if you look here, right, these are super close, but you can tell that they're opposites, right? X and 6 and 6 are the same number, but x is positive here and it's negative here, and x is negative here and it's positive here. So these are opposites. So we're going to use our -1 trick, okay? So for this one, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to rewrite all of this. And I'm going to factor out a negative. When I do that, this positive becomes negative, and this negative becomes positive, right? Because if I distribute that negative back, negative times a negative is a positive, negative times a positive is a negative, right? So it's the same thing, I'm just rewriting it a different way, okay? Then I'm just going to switch the order of these. I'm just rewriting this. And I'm going to write the x first, so which is positive, and then just -6. And if you see, now I have the same thing. I have my x minus 6. So I can just factor that out. And then whatever's left, 2x squared minus 3. And boom, there's the answer. All right. Now, this doesn't say to check, but for this first one, I just want to check it so you can see that it ends up being the same. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this, x minus 6, 2x squared minus 3. And this is a great way is to check yourself to make sure that you did it right, because there's a lot of steps in here, especially for a quiz or test or even your homework. It's always good to check. So we're just going to do FOIL, or the distributive property, twice. Right, so x times 2x squared, that's going to be 2x cubed. And then x times a negative 3 is just going to be negative 3x. And then we're going to do the bottom, this one right here, the negative 6, we're going to distribute that. That's the inside, and this is the last. So negative 6 times 2x squared, negative 6 times 2 is a negative 12x squared. And then a negative times a negative is a positive. 6 times 3 is 18. And then I'm just going to see, okay, so we got 2x cubed. Do I have a negative 12x? Yes, I do. Do I have an 18? Yes, and a negative 3x. So I could just what would I have to do? I have to switch a few of these. But, so I can just rearrange it and it'd be the same, right? And then it has the 18. So it's not in standard form. But it's okay. It's the same thing. So there we have it. It's the same. Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and try this again here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to factor by grouping, right? So we're going to group these first two together here. And then we're going to group the last two together here. So we're going to factor out what's common here. So what's common? We have numbers. We have letters, right? So between 15 and 10, I'm going to say the common factor is 5. And x squared and x cubed, what do you think? The common factor would be x squared. So then we're just going to go for it. 5 times what is 15? 3. And x squared times what is x squared? It would be x squared times 1 is x squared, right? So we're just good with 3. Now we're going to move here. 5 times what is a negative 10? Well, we need a negative. 5 times what is 10? So 5 times 2 is 10. And then x squared times what is x cubed? It'd just be x. Okay, so that's the first part. Now we're going to move here. We're going to look at the numbers, okay, and then the letters, but there's no letter over here, so we're just going to factor out numbers that are the greatest common factor between 8 and 12. What is that? What do you think? If you're thinking 4, you would be correct. So we're going to write plus 4. 4 times what is 8? 4 times 2, then we just write the x. And then 4 times what is a negative 12? Well, we need a negative. 4 times 3. So there we have it. Okay, so if you look here, we have 3 and negative 3, positive 3, negative 3, and 2x, this is negative and this is positive. So these are opposites, right? They're really, really close. We can't just factor them out, but we have to do that little negative 1 trick to get them exactly the same. They're very, very close. They're opposites, but that's when we know, hey, we need to do the negative 1 trick. So I'm going to rewrite all of this. And then I'm going to make this negative. I'm going to factor out a negative. So this is going to be, this is positive, and it's going to become negative. And this is negative, and then it's going to become positive. Right? And if you look, if I was to distribute that negative back, a negative times a negative is a positive times a positive is a negative. So it's the same thing, right? We're just writing it differently so that we can factor out that this group right here. Okay, but I'm going to rewrite this. Okay, to put the 3 in front, and then the positive 3, right? And then the negative 2x is here. And then look, what do we have? We have 3 minus 2x and 3 minus 2x, so we can factor that out. And then what is left is 5x squared minus 4. Boom, that is our answer. Perfect. Okay, we are on our last one, example. Check it out, example 5B. And I want you to try this one on your own. Okay, so here's my friend the pause dragon, reminding you to pause your device. Go ahead and work out this problem. When you get done, press play and we'll go over it together. All right, see you in a bit. Okay, let's see how you did. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 terms, so we know we're going to be factoring by grouping. So I'm going to group the first two together, and I'm going to group the last two together here. Okay, and let's just go for it. So we have 8y and -8. What's in common here? There's numbers and there's no letters that are common because there's no letter here. So the number, the greatest common factor between 8 and 8 would just be 8. So we're going to factor out that 8. And then 8 times what is 8? Well, it would be 1, right? But because of this y, I'm just going to write y. And then we have 8 times what is -8? Well, I'm going to need a negative here. And 8 times what is 8? 8 times 1. So that's when I write the 1. It's because there's nothing else I can write except 1. Here I could write a y, so I didn't need to write 1y, right? Because 1y is the same thing as y. Okay, so now here, okay, there's letters. There's x's and y's. So there's an x in common. Is there a y in common? No, there's not. So we're just going to factor out an x, right? So we're going to have plus x, and then x times what is -x? Well, this would be -1, right? X times -1 is -x, and then x times what is xy, and it would be a positive y, right? If we distribute that back just to check, x times -1 is -x, x times y is xy. Okay, so let's look here. What do we have? We have a positive y, and we have a -1. So these are actually the same. They're just written a little differently. So I'm just going to rewrite this one and put the y first, and then just -1 because it's a positive y and it's a -1. Okay, and there we have it. They are exactly the same, so we can go ahead and factor that y minus 1 out, right? And then we're left with 8 plus x. And if you got that one right, yoga denki mashita, you did a wonderful job. If you didn't, go ahead and correct your work so it looks just like mine. And that's it for this lesson. I will see you in a little bit for the next lesson, Chapter 7, Lesson 3. All right, bye.